I can hear something calling. It's calling me every day. If taking a chance is a crime, then I've got hell to pay. I've been walking the streets in my mind, trying to find a new day. Keep on searching until I will find, until I find a new way. I'm gonna say something, I hope you don't mind. It's time to rearrange. I walk round in circles, I'm going nowhere. It's time to make a change.
Hi everyone, thanks for tuning in. I am your host, Charles Wallace, and welcome to the Bear Essentials podcast. As we continue on our journey to build a stronger community, I'm very excited to share with you all the Kindness Alliance, which is a unique free of charge advertising initiative looking to support businesses that share in our core values. Each episode will look to spotlight a different member, celebrating their contributions and dedication to kindness. Would you like to get involved? Just visit the Kindness Alliance section on our website, www.thebearessentialspodcast.com, or just send me a message. And now, a huge thank you to this week's Kindness Alliance member.
Hi, Joel Maurer, founder of Dink Ninjas. Dink Ninjas was dreamed up and started right here in Austin, Texas, a dynamic pickleball community. We arm pickleballers with the paddles, apparel, and accessories to dink like a ninja. Dink Ninjas is dedicated to supporting mental health awareness and cancer research. Shop our full lineup at dinkninjas.com.
Hey, Damien, how you doing? Thanks for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, pleasure to be on the show.
Yeah, it's really an honor to have you here. You have a lot going on. We're definitely going to get into it. Real quick, for those who may not be familiar, this is Damien Lewis, really well-renowned author, has a lot of projects going on. I don't want to spoil it. And you know what? Maybe with that, Damien, would you mind doing a brief introduction of yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I'm obviously British. I was a war reporter for approaching 3 decades. So I went to all the kind of trouble spots you can imagine, reporting for the likes, mainly TV, BBC, CNN, those kind of outlets. So filming my own stuff, but also doing stuff on camera. And in the process of doing so, of course, I was embedded with lots of different military units, sometimes behind the lines, and met a bunch of former elite forces guys who I started running books with. So that's how I got into kind of being the voice in a way for, and the historian of the special forces community. That's a brief introduction.
Yeah, thanks for that, Damien. I think that's here's a great spot to start then. From knowing what I know about you and your career, what I was curious about was what initially drew you to war reporting? Obviously dangerous. And then I'd also like to know, how did those experiences really shape your view on humanity in general and conflict?
Yeah, so I was drawn to war reporting. I mean, the truth of the matter is, it's the most addictive thing on earth, and it must sound a very strange thing to say, but it's highly addictive, because if you can try and understand, if someone's tried to shoot you and kill you, and they failed, there is no moment you will ever feel more alive than that, because someone's just tried to take your life away. So it is a hugely addictive process, and it's something that I think war reporters and soldiers share in common. This being drawn back to that conflict situation, those frontline situations again and again and again, and generally soldiers only leave when they have to, and so do war reporters. I had to stop doing it for various medical reasons. So I haven't really reported from war zones now for probably 15 years or so. But what it kind of teaches you about conflict and the human situation. One of the things it teaches you, which I think is really important in this day and age, is how vital and precious freedom is, democratic freedoms. Because when you've reported in lots of unpleasant parts of the world where those have been taken away, or people are trying to take those away, you start to understand how much we must fight for those freedoms we hold and cherish, and perhaps now take for granted too much. So that's something that, you know, the experience really brought home. And the other thing that it kind of bizarrely makes you appraised of is that you can walk into the worst situations imaginable, and you will still find human kindness and compassion and an amazing welcome. And that's one of the other reasons it's so addictive. You know, you can walk into these terrible, terrible situations, but find people, you know, welcome you in with open arms because you're there to tell the world about their issues and their problems. So, yeah, those are some of the kind of takeaways from 3 decades of doing that kind of somewhat insane work.
And I think just as we start here, I think that message you just give is so timely for obviously you being British, me being American, but it's extremely timely for both of our countries and where we all find ourselves currently. So a great message to start with. I'm curious. I do a lot of speaking on the podcast about mental health, coping, things like that. So I was also interested in that. How does covering wars affect your personal life, your mental health, and your coping mechanisms?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So, nobody who, or very few people who do the work I was doing have relationships that last. It destroys personal relationships with family and friends, to be frank with you. It destroys them with friends because after a while you can't relate to anything other than being in a war zone, so everyone's alienated from you. And it destroys relationships with your loved ones, you know, your partner, because you're just always away and they never know if you're alive or dead. So it's immensely corrosive to those kind of relationships. I'm now married with children, but that happened after I stopped being a war reporter. It would never have happened in my view had I carried on doing so. Um, what effect does it have on you long term? Well, I don't think anyone walks away from 1 year, let alone 3 decades of the kind of reporting I was doing without carrying the trauma with you. That's inevitable. I was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder about 5 or 6 years ago. I don't mind talking about it. I think, you know, we should be quite open about these things. And you know, I cope with it by you know, I meditate. I exercise is really important, and family and friends are really important. You know, that kind of community that you need. So, you know, those are the takeaways in terms of mental health, and it's really important that you know, in the field I was in, you know, war reporting or any reporting from trauma. You know, it doesn't have to be war. It can be, you know, it can be a terrorist attack in America or the UK, or it can be a fire or an emergency situation with, you know, a road traffic accident. All these things can be traumatizing. It's really important. Those who are at the front line feel free to speak about, you know, whether it has affected them and in what ways it has.
And I think what you said there is so vital because the speaking about it and being open about it. And I wanted to try to get that message across from someone like you, who I would say was more to the extreme end with the war reporting and what you saw and where you were, and just everyday people, especially men, who just the daily struggle of the day, be open, talk about it. I think that's a real important message. I did want to ask you, you know, as long as you've done that, is there any story, maybe one story that stands out that really affected you the most, and why?
Gosh, tough question. Yeah, there's a couple of stories. I mean, one, and it's probably going to seem hard to understand, but imagine yourself. So imagine you as the interviewer or the listener, stepping into. So that this example is in North Africa, and I went out to film a famine, uh, and it was pretty bad, as you can imagine. And the point about it is when you are especially a TV cameraman or even a stills cameraman, you have to force yourself not to behave like a normal human being. So what that means is, if you can imagine it. So I remember, you know, one situation where you know there was a young lady with her child. The child was probably 2 or 3 years old, and the child was dying of malnutrition. Now, what a normal human being does in that situation, you see this stick thin child, and it's heartrending, and so you help. You do whatever you can to help. But as a cameraman and a reporter, you have to film the child in extremis. In fact, you have to film the child pass away. That's what you have to force yourself to do. So you dehumanize the normal human reaction to human situations. And over time, that's immensely corrosive to your soul and your well-being. You can imagine the drip, drip, drip effect of that. And the reason you do that, of course, is because you tell yourself, well, it's more important that I put that child's image on the news to millions of people than it is that I help one child. Now, that's a logical calculus, you could argue, but it isn't the way a normal human being would react. So it's as I say, it's hugely debilitating psychologically over the long term. If you can imagine years and years of having to make yourself behave like that, it's deeply unnatural. And then the other situation, which just one of many, where I look back on it and think that was somewhat insane, was when I was asked to go and investigate an allegation of chemical weapons use in an African war zone. And I had been trained by the British government's biological and chemical and nuclear defense people to take samples of biological and chemical weapons. I've never been in the military, but I was trained to be able to do this so they could then analyze the samples. And so myself and two elite forces guys went into this African war zone. They were charged to take the samples. I was filming it, and I was going to carry the samples back to the UK to get them analysed. And the reason why I'm telling the story is because, you know, we turned up there. We were dressed in full nuclear, biological, and chemical masks, suits, gloves, the works. Boiling hot country. There are these craters. They're full of this eerie red liquid. The guys go in to sample it, and I'm there on the crater rim filming, and I suddenly realised that my eyepieces of eye masks have steamed up, so I can't see anything to film. And anyway, the gloves are too bulky for me to actually be able to use the camera. So then I face a dilemma. Do I not film anything? And the reason why the film is really important, well, obviously, one, you need to put the story on the news. That's very important. But two, even more importantly, there's something called the chain of custody. When you're taking these kind of samples, you need to prove you took these samples in the place you took them on the date you said you took them, and then you document the chain of custody all the way back to delivery to the people doing the analysis. And the vital part of the chain of custody is obviously filming it all. It's a key plank of the evidence. And so I face that dilemma. Do I remove the mask and the gloves and film, or do I protect myself from whatever toxin may have been used and not film anything? And so I took off the mask and gloves and filmed. Now, that, looking back on it, that is an utterly insane decision. But the point about it is, when you're in those situations and you see the effect this has had on the local people. In fact, this was United Nations food aid convoy that had been hit. So you see the effect it's had on these people. And then you kind of forge that brotherhood very quickly with those two elite forces guys I was there with. Very, very quickly in these situations, 24, 48 hours, you're brothers in arms. You do things which, you look back on and think that was just beyond my comprehension. But at the time, it made absolute sense.
Yeah, Damien, I mean, honestly, kudos to you. I think it also shows, hearing both those examples of what you went through there, just, I think courage and bravery are found in places sometimes where we don't even think to look. And I've had a decent amount of special forces and military people on this program, and I don't think we think about a war correspondent or somebody who has to film things like that, but it's courage from a different direction. And well, thank you for all that you've done and continue to do. So I like to transition a little bit here into from the war correspondence to writing. So what motivated that shift from the war reporting to writing your books, and how did the journalism that you experienced over all those years, how did that influence your writing?
Yeah, so it was absolute accident. You could call it serendipity, I guess, that took me into writing books. So what happened was I was actually off in the Sudan, southern Sudan in North Africa, the world's longest running civil war. And I was actually filming a story about a young Black African woman who'd been taken as a slave, and because slavery still exists there to this day. And I came back to the UK, and that's when I had my shock medical situation and operation. And basically, it was a life or death situation, and I'm extremely lucky to be alive, and extremely lucky not to be paralyzed from the waist down. Anyway, trying to cut a long story short. So I was probably a year in recovery. I couldn't go off to war zones. So I kind of stopped. I was forced to stop. And in that time, a publisher heard about the story I'd been working on, this young lady's story, and said, would you write that as a book? And I had nothing else to do. So I wrote it as a book and with her. And it was called Slave. And it was a #1 international bestseller. It was made into a movie. So I kind of, thought, well, maybe I'm reasonably good at doing this. And then I was actually back in the Sudan after that. So I didn't make me stop completely. As I said, it's highly addictive. And I was there making for 3 months filming with the International Committee of the Red Cross and also with Médecins Sans Frontières, the Doctors Without Borders. And one of my security guys, it turned out, was a former SAS guy. And as I say, you build these incredible bonds with people real quickly. And he told me a story one evening around the campfire. I said, and it was a story about one of the missions of the SAS, the Special Air Service, Britain's Special Forces. And it was in 2000, and in Sierra Leone in West Africa, another long-running civil war, absolutely brutal, just incomprehensibly brutal. Amputations were the trademark of the rebels, and the British Army had gone in to act as peacekeepers to stop the civil war. 17 Royal Irish Rangers, British soldiers, had been kidnapped by the rebels, and so the SAS had been sent in to mount a hostage rescue mission. And to give you an idea of how suicidal the mission was, because they ended up having to fly into the jungle, into this incredibly well-defended rebel base to rescue them. They had to fly in on helicopters. And to give you an idea how suicidal it was, the men themselves nicknamed the Operation Certain Death. That's the name they gave it themselves, with that kind of grim humor that the British military specializes in. And so he told me this entire story. And the rebels had said to the British, if you try and rescue the hostages, we will do to you what the Somalis did to American special forces in Mogadishu and Somalia. That became the book and the movie Black Hawk Down. That's what they threatened. Anyway, the hostage rescue mission was an incredible success. And he told me this story, and I said, why do we not know about this? That's just the most incredible tale of special forces, heroism and daring do. And so he then helped, because they had got to know the hostages well, because they'd rescued them and then they befriended them. So he said, I can introduce you to the hostages, I can introduce you to the guys on the mission. So that happened, and I wrote that book, and it was called Operation Certain Death, and that became a top 10 bestseller. And I guess it just, I had other people then approach me from that community. And going back to what you asked, really, really important question. I think, especially when you're writing non-fiction, but I think with fiction too, actually, you should write about what you know. And ideally, you should write about what you've experienced, ideally. And as I said, I've been in these situations. I've been taken hostage myself. I can sit down with anybody from the military community and we can talk exactly the same language. The only difference is I've been carrying a camera, they've been carrying a gun. I've been in situations on the front line where, an elite forces guy's been there as doing security, and after a while he's turned around and said, we thought we were insane. You're the mad ones, because we're here with a gun taking cover and we can shoot back. You're here with a camera, you can't shoot back, and you're not taking cover, you're trying to get the best shots. So you share you share the language and the understanding. So, I've had, any number of elite forces veterans, sit in my study and tell me their stories. And, they've been in tears for a lot of the time, and they've been talking about stuff they've never told anyone, because I guess they sense that, they're talking to someone who gets it, who understands. So that's what I try and bring to the book. And I know, I've written a lot about, contemporary special forces operations, but also about, those from World War II, because you have to drill back into the history. I think it's really important to understand where this all came from. And I try to bring that to the pages. And so when I'm writing a more historical book, my ethos is you bring history alive. I'm not a historian, I bring it alive. And that's what you have to do. And I think you can do that best if you've actually been there and experienced much of what those who you're writing about, have experienced themselves.
Man, there's a lot there. Thank you so much for that. And it was a good segue. I dabble a little bit in writing, nothing at the level that you are. I enjoy it. I have one book, and I like to work. I'm working on some historical fiction. So, somewhat selfishly, this question, but I was really, really curious about your whole research process and how do you get the historical details? Because personally, I love history and I find that it's always, cross-checking, trying to figure out, did I say that right? Am I going to say something here that doesn't make sense two chapters later? So how does your process work, Damien?
Yeah, so when writing history, and when I say history, I'm talking World War II to the kind of reasonably recent. You know, the research is everything. It takes far longer, excuse me, to research a historical book than it ever does to write it. It takes months and months and months to research one of my historical books, and then just a few months to write it. So I'll give you one example. I wrote the wartime story of Josephine Baker, who was the black female superstar before the war, American born, but made her name in France and Europe, and then became a standout spy for the Allies during the war. It was an incredible untold story. Now, to write that book, and actually I had to research it during the COVID lockdown. So I had a researcher in America going into all the American archives. I had a researcher in France going into all the French archives. I had a researcher in Germany going through some of the German archives, and a researcher in the UK going through the UK archives. They then sent me all the massive trove of information. They dug up all those files, and I then had to catalog and read, and then digest all of that material into the plan for the book. And that process is key. It's taking There's no point doing a vast amount of research. I mean, if I could turn my screen around, you can probably see behind me all those files. They're all research files. There's no point doing a massive body of research unless you can distill that into a structure and a process that works. So when I write a historical book, document, my research document will probably run to 70, 80, 90, 100,000 words before I even start writing. And that's the narrative of the story, but interspersed in the narrative are all the sources for every single point was going to be writing about. So every stage when you're writing it, you can go, right, pluck that file off the shelf, go to the exact document, and you know what your sources are. And then, of course, memories from war in particular tend to be fragmentary and contradictory. That's natural. Everybody remembers things slightly differently, and so your process then has to become, what is the most likely scenario? You cross-reference all the sources, and then you, as the author or the historian, have to judge what is the most likely, what is the most credible scenario from all the research you've done, and that's what you write. And then, of course, if you can, and if you're talking World War II, it's still just about possible. You want to try and talk to those who are still alive. So last February, I interviewed one of the last surviving veterans of the Special Air Service who fought in World War II, a chap called Alec Borry. I interviewed him in February. I'm the last person to have interviewed him. I don't know if he had ever given an interview before, and sadly he passed away in May. So we're losing these people very fast, but it's still possible to get those first-hand testimonies, and that material is vital because it gives you a feel for it and a sense of the reality on the ground that they experience. So if you can, talk to the real people who were there. If it's older history, then it's about finding those first-hand sources from the time, the voice, from the time that you're writing about.
Yeah, I just hearing you say it, and I can see behind you. And I was thinking when you first came on screen today, just how much of that, it just looks like all the effort and work that you put into everything, which you can tell. I know we'll get into it more, but even the movie that's out, watching that, I just, knowing I was doing this today, really giving me appreciation for what you did to get that all together. Before we get into that, though, I wanted to touch a little bit on your current book that's out. And congratulations, doing really, really well. I've not finished it yet. I have read some of it. I was given a copy, really, really enjoying it. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that. any new insights or untold stories does SAS Great Escapes 3, anything that brings to light?
Yeah, it really hit a nerve over here because well, not over here. I mean, across the free world, because one of the stories, there are 6 stories in the volume SAS Great Escapes 3. They're all World War II stories, and one of them is about how this incredible and largely untold figure called Major Oswald Carey Elwes um, carried out an operation in France just after D-Day, and basically the SAS was sent in to. I'm trying to simplify the story to one, cause havoc and chaos behind the lines, which was always their mission, to stop German troops from getting to the Normandy beaches. But two, and really fascinating and never before told, as far as I know, they were sent in there to rise up the French resistance, to arm thousands of French resistance via airdrops, and then to reconnoiter and check out the defences of one of the key French ports in Brittany, probably Saint Malo is what they would have chosen, and then to take that port by force of arms. So that's the SAS combined with the French resistance, and hold it for long enough for the Allies to launch a second D-Day. So to land ships there and land troops there. So we're talking a long way to the west of the Normandy beaches. And the idea was that if Normandy was running into the sand, if the German defences proved too fearsome, there would have been a second kind of mini D-Day happen at Saint Malo. We'd have landed tens of thousands of troops, and so outflanked the German defensive in one fell swoop. And so that would have obviously, enabled the troops at Normandy to break out. Now, as far as I know, that story's never been told, and it's absolutely fascinating to have found something of that historical ilk, and that's why it got widespread press coverage. And the other story I'll just touch upon is the one where, just because it's so amazing, in early 45, 36 SAS parachuted into northern Italy behind the Gothic line, which was at that stage the Germans' massive defensive line to stop Allied forces marching through Italy into Germany. And they parachuted in there to basically, their mission was to be the bait in the trap. And they were charged to cause so much havoc and chaos behind the Gothic line that the enemy would think there were many more, hundreds of them, send thousands of troops from the Gothic line to hunt them down, so weakening the Gothic line defences and allowing the Allies to break through. And that's exactly what they did. These 36 men, under the command of a chap called Bob Walker-Brown, Captain Bob Walker-Brown, an amazing figure, they just caught, at times they forced whole German garrisons to evacuate towns. There were 36 of them, aided, of course, by the Italian resistance, the partisans. They caused so much havoc and chaos that the Germans ended up thinking there were 500 of them, if not more. And so they sent in 10,000 troops to hunt them down. And boy, was the hunt fearsome. And boy, did they have to go above and beyond to escape. But that mission is just, it's incredible and inconceivable what they achieved. And, imagine it today. We're sending you in to be the bait in a trap, so the enemy is sending 10,000 troops to hunt you down behind enemy lines. And by the way, there's no way of you getting back again. We're not about to pull you out. If any of you survive, you have to make your own way back through the snowbound mountains and through the Gothic line. It's a suicide mission, and yet they pulled it off. And it's one of the stories told in Great Escapes 3, sorry. And it was, there's a lot of press coverage about it because it's just so iconic in terms of the kind of crazy, maverick, inspired, unbelievably courageous missions that the SAS and other units carried out in the Second World War.
And I know that story about Major Oswald Carey Elwes. It was actually 2 questions from now I was going to ask you about it. So I know that was a really big part of the book, and it fascinated me. And again, thanks for jumping in and talking about it. It's something I did want to ask about. So since you kind of touched on that, let me ask this. You talked about the other story behind the Gothic line. Damien, already just reading some of the SAS Great Escapes 3, hearing you talk about it, sounds like a lot of potential there for additional movies on the horizon. Any plans or anything like that revolving around some of these stories?
Well, the incredible thing is that well, there's 2 incredible things. The first thing is bizarrely, I mean, it's just such a bizarre coincidence. Oswald Cary Elwes, Major Oswald Cary Elwes from the Second World War, the SAS hero, is part of the Cary Elwes family of the Cary Elwes who stars in the Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare and plays M, the head of the SOE in the movie. They are distantly related. So you have a well-known modern day actor playing a true life special operations executive hero in the Ministry of Gentleman Warfare, whose predecessor, Major Oswald Cary Elwes, carried out some of the most extraordinary operations in the Second World War, that the SAS ever carried out. Just give you one other example, because it's not in SAS Great Escapes 3. And again, it's well, you tell me if this is mind blowing, because it absolutely blew my mind. So about 10 years ago, I was approached by the family of Colonel Blair Paddy Mayne, who was the commander of the Special Air Service for most of the war. A Northern Irishman, but a man of probably arguably the most highly decorated British soldier of the Second World War, and an absolute legendary figure. Anyway, his family approached me and said, "Would you come and look through all the family archives?" So that's all the war chests and everything that he had accumulated over 5 years of operating behind enemy lines, which is a golden gift for a historian and an author. So I did, and they wanted to know if there might be a book that could come out of that that material. Well, there were 3 books. I've just literally finishing the third, which is called SAS Daggers Drawn. The other 2 have been written and published. Anyway, in that war chest, I came across this document which made a brief reference to a mission that took place in the autumn of 1943. So British and American and Allied forces are landing in southern Italy. This is the Operation Husky landings, the prelude to D-Day, crowbarring open the soft underbelly of Europe, as we called it. It didn't turn out that way, but that was the idea. So open the first front in southern Italy, then open the second front a few months later in the Normandy landings. The SAS are serving at the tip of the spear, and a force lands at the port of Taranto in southern Italy, 60 strong, 1 SAS squadron, and they're in their Willys Jeeps, the American-made brilliant four-wheel drive Jeeps. They establish a bridgehead, and then a Yugoslav partisan, a former Yugoslav partisan, turns up the bridgehead. He's called Zelko, and he says, "I've just escaped from a concentration camp." Italy had concentration camps too, and they were pretty damn similar to those in Nazi Germany. And all the Allied commanders say, "What's a concentration camp?" Because, of course, we had no idea at the time. He described what it was. We all understand what a concentration camp is. I don't need to go into it. And the Allied commanders basically say, "Well, why have you come to us?" And Zelko says, because they're about to load all the concentration camp inmates onto trains and ship them to Nazi Germany. And, of course, that will be a death sentence. So these are Allied commanders of airborne, but traditional airborne units. These are not maverick special forces commanders. And what are we going to do about it? They're there to achieve military aims. You could argue there's no military aim or end in going to the rescue of hundreds of concentration camp victims, because you don't seize any territory, you don't achieve any military aim, and in fact, you burden yourself with hundreds of concentration camp inmates. However, Oswald Cary Elwes, the SAS major, and other commanders on the ground, SAS commanders on the ground, step forward and say, "We'll go." Now, this is 120 kilometers behind enemy lines, okay? The concentration camp, it's called Pistici. They have Willys Jeeps, and in Willys Jeeps you can sit 4 people, and it's pretty crammed. But they've got to rescue hundreds of concentration camp inmates. So how do you do it? What are you going to do? Well, it's obvious, isn't it? You're going to hijack a train, steam the train 120 kilometers through enemy territory, get to the concentration camp, because, of course, the guards at the concentration camp are used to trains turning up for horrific reasons that we understand. You're going to take the camp by complete surprise for that reason. You're going to load all the concentration camp victims onto the train and steam all the way back to Allied lines. And that is exactly what they proceed to do. And not only that, because they know there's a vital road and rail junction halfway along the route, they divide the force in half, and half go across enemy lines in jeeps in the dead of night, fight their way to that road and rail junction. They hold it for 48 hours to allow the train to steam through, get to the concentration camp, load up all the concentration camp inmates, and steam back again safely, because without that junction being held, it would never have got through. It's a true story. And I've now corroborated it from 3 or 4 other reports. And I've actually spoken to the sons and daughters of some of those who were on that very mission. Just totally mind-blowing. If you propose that outline of a story as a Hollywood movie, people say, yeah, it's a great story, but it would never have happened. No one will believe it. It is entirely 100% true. And there are still, and it's never been publicized there until I wrote about it, in the last year or so. There are still these amazing stories to be discovered. Isn't that incredible? I mean, it's just unbelievable, isn't it? You can still find these stories like that, which are untold to this day.
It's fascinating to me. I personally, I could sit here and listen all day to those stories, and I think thanks to your writing and what you're doing, it brings it to life. And there's the saying, fact is sometimes stranger than fiction. I would argue that sometimes fact is even more courageous than fiction, and I think that your books are proving that. So man, I'm looking forward to more that you do. You've put out so much already. I'm looking so forward to even more that you have to come. Hey, real quick, I did want to touch on something though. You mentioned, and I was curious about this, and it reminded me the memorabilia that when you went into the chest, Damien, having something like that in your hands, right? That goes back. Does it somewhat bring you there? Does it really bring you in touch with the history of it all to that person?
Sure, sure. I mean, great question. So I walked into the family home of the main family in Northern Ireland, um, and the first thing I saw was the man's uniform and his beret and the binoculars with a swastika on them that he'd stolen or taken, looted from a dead German officer, in the field, and then the massive wooden war chest with his name stamped across the top of it, and then opening the war chest, stuff full of diaries, letters, photographs, film, undeveloped film, um, and then a plethora of other wartime memorabilia. To be honest with you, there was a moment when I thought, "Gosh, am I up to this?" That's what you think because it's never been seen before certainly by a historian, and this is priceless. The commander of the SAS for most of the war. This is what he's collected over 5 years of waging war behind enemy lines, and here it all is before you. In one town in Germany, in northern Germany, when they spearheaded the march on Berlin. So we're talking, spring '45. The SS hard fought battle for the town of Schneeren in northwest Germany. They lost 4 guys killed in action and several wounded. And so they get into the town of Schneeren, and Hitler had published these massive leather-bound books called, and they were called the Chronic, and they were like for each of his favoured townsfolk to record the history of their community under the glories of the Reich. And I say glories tongue in cheek, obviously, and the SS find the Chronic of Schneeren town, and so they take it. And they take it. They say, right, in the dying days of the war, when it's clearly lost, you've killed 4 of our guys, and we have loads of wounded, and we've been killing your people. And so many of the people then fighting were Hitler Youth. There was one 14-year-old kid who tried to attack them in Schneeren town and then burst into tears. And they took him captive and then said, just go home. You're a kid, go home. So they took the Chronic of Schneeren, they took it, and Paddy Mayne took it back to Northern Ireland, and then they removed all the pages for it. It's a huge, huge leather-bound. It's the biggest book you'll have ever seen. They removed the pages, unscrewed the brass bolts that held it together, removed all the pages, and in the Chronic, they then bound up the history of the SAS over over the period of World War II. So that's reports, letters, press reports, photographs, and everything at the main home. When I went to visit them, they had the original Schneeren, the original leather-bound, cover, and the pages that they kept from the inside. I mean, this stuff is just, it's living history, and it was that was a hell of a moment.
Wow. Again, it fascinates me listening to it. And I'm so glad that someone like yourself is here to at least relay it to people like me who really, really enjoy it. And I think there's still so much to learn from it all. All right. So I wanted to get into this now, and keep me honest here, but I believe now the movie based on your book is going to premiere now on Amazon Prime on July 25th. I believe. Shout out also right now to your team who I've worked with to coordinate this interview. Just thank you so much to Sophie. I believe Sophie is her name.
Yeah.
She had me so well prepared to speak to you today. So thank you for that.
Brilliant.
So the movie will premiere on Amazon on July 25th. This week, actually, because by the time this airs, it will be this week. So I want to ask a little bit about this. What's it like to have your book adapted to a film, and then not only to a film, but somebody of the stature of a Guy Ritchie? And then what role do you play in that process, Damien?
Yeah, so it's obviously it's hugely exciting getting someone of Guy Ritchie's stature to adapt the book. I mean, the book was published um, in 2014, so it's a long time ago now, and it was published in the UK under the title Churchill's Secret Warriors, but in the States it was published under the title The Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare, and that's the title the movie producers, decided to go with. And I've got to give a huge shout out to Chad Oman and Jerry Bruckheimer as well, the producers on the movie, because they always said to me, because as I say, it took 10 years to bring this movie to fruition, because they optioned the book right at the very, very outset, in terms of trying to make it into a movie. And they always said to me, Damien, we're going to get this movie made. And when we get this movie made, we are determined to make sure you are proud of what you see on screen. And it's been an incredibly long journey, and they've been tenacious beyond belief in terms of just being determined to get it made. And I think part of the reason they were so determined, not only because it's a great story, but because there are really important lessons from a movie like this for today. And again, it's about that universal theme. What are ordinary people thrust into a world war willing to sacrifice and willing to risk in freedom's cause? Because bear in mind, right, if you were serving, with the Special Operations Executive, as these guys were, now SOE, the nickname for the SOE was the Ministry for Ungentlemanly Warfare, hence the title for the book and the movie. SOE was set up by Winston Churchill, Britain's wartime leader, to do all the things you're not allowed to do in war. So to break all the rules, it was top secret ministry. It didn't, on paper, it didn't exist. So it was charged to do assassinations, bribery, corruption, money laundering, raising guerrilla armies, bribery, corruption, blackmail. There was nothing, no hold barred as far as the SOE were concerned. But that meant, and this is the key point, if you were an SOE agent, as these guys were, the movie's billed as the world's first black operatives, deniable operations, which indeed they were, and indeed these were. But if you were one of those agents, you were sent into the field, as these guys were, in civilian clothing, on false identification documents. If you were captured by the enemy, your own government, the British government, would deny any knowledge of you as individuals or your mission. Okay, so you'd be hung out to dry by your own government, and all that would happen in terms of those who captured you was horrendous torture and then death, because you would be branded as a spy for the reasons that you were not deploying in uniform. And Hitler had already decreed by this time in the war that anybody captured behind enemy lines, any of these kind of special operators, would be only kept for as alive as long enough as the Gestapo and SS needed to interrogate them, and then they would be killed out of hand. So capture was a death sentence. And bear in mind, some of the SOE agents, a very significant proportion, were women. And in the case of the women, and of course there's a woman in the movie, she's played by Isa Gonzalez. She's the SOE agent, and in my view, Isa's performance is one of the show stealers of the entire movie. She's brilliant. But if you were an SOE female operative, all you had to protect you was your guile, your beauty, your wits, and your charm, and your bravery. These were the most courageous individuals imaginable in the war. Sometimes, sent behind enemy lines alone, or just a few of them, as these guys were. So, and in the case of the female agents, of course, there are worse things that SS and Gestapo captors can do to a female agent, as we all understand, than they can do to a male. So the level of courage and bravery involved is it's humbling. And it basically makes you wonder, or I hope it does. I hope those people who watch the movie wonder this: what would I have done? What would I have done in that situation when the freedom and liberty of the civilized world was truly at stake, under threat of this global expanding of Nazism? What would I have done? I think that's something that I know the book brings home to people, and I really hope the movie does too.
Yeah, I think it did. And I'm glad you mentioned that about her role. There was the scene in that movie when just some of the intellectual part of it, when she was having the back and forth, when she was trying to, when she first met and was trying to seduce. I don't want to give too much away, but it was just very much like, with all the action around it, it was, I'll be totally honest with you, I'm a huge fan of uh the Jack Reacher show. So I was curious to see what that character would be like. So seeing some of the just dynamic between all of them and the interaction, but that, mentioning her, I agree with you. I think she did a great job, and it was really fascinating to watch just the intellectual and the dialogue and the intensity that happened in those scenes with that dialogue. So I think they did a really good job there. So yeah, everybody, the Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare will premiere on Amazon on July 25th. About, just in general, when you're doing your books, a movie like that, how do you balance that historical accuracy with the compelling narrative? And even listening to you here today, like, you bring something from so long ago to life, and it really, the train behind it, that was putting me there. How do you balance that?
Yeah, well, my books are true stories, so they are the reality, the narrative as it happened. A movie or a TV drama series is an adaptation, and the movie actually premiered in the States 2 or 3 months ago. I mean, I went to New York to the premiere. I'd seen it before, but here's the thing, okay? I've got 4 kids. My youngest is a 15-year-old girl, love her to death, okay? She is never going to sit down and read, with all due respect, my book, The Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare. It's just not going to happen. Okay, but we all sat down to watch the movie before it was even released, because I got sent an early copy, obviously. And that's my wife, my 4 kids, and me. And everybody loved it. My 15-year-old daughter loved it. Now, that is a hell of an achievement. So hats off to Guy Ritchie, hats off to Alan Ritchson, the Jack Reacher character who plays Anders Lassen in the movie, who actually I think is one of the absolute show stealers of the whole movie. He's brilliant. Hats off to Henry Cavill. Hats off to the whole cast, because to do that, to bring a World War II movie to life, in such story to life in such a way that you can captivate an entire family, that's an incredible achievement. And I've just, to round that off, we then a week later, sat down to watch Let's Choose a Movie. Went on to Netflix, had a look what was available, and my daughter chose The Imitation Game, the movie about Bletchley Park and the code breakers in World War II. So that's how much it turned her on to the fact that World War II stories can still be gripping, fun, an amazing roller coaster ride, but relevant to today. Now, that to achieve that, from a movie like The Minister of Ungentlemanly Warfare, that's awesome. I can't do that in a book. My books they do get read by 12-year-olds through to 92-year-olds and everybody in between, but they're probably not going to be read by a 15-year-old girl, and that I just got to take my hat off to the whole Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare team for achieving that. Does it mean that it's all real, what's on the screen? Of course it doesn't. No, there are scenes in there which didn't happen as they're portrayed, but the point about it is, do you remember the scene where they go and rescue Appleyard on the island because they need him for the mission? That scene didn't happen in real life, but a scene pretty much exactly like that did happen later in the book. What happens in the book is, because the movie only covers the first fifth of the book, because the idea is that there will be sequels covering other parts of the story that unfolds. And slightly later in the book, there's a raid that they carry out a raid on an island. They're there to actually assault a German garrison and take prisoners. It's a story pretty much like the one portrayed. So the point is, they capture the spirit and essence of who these people were. And I'll tell you something else. When I went onto the set, which is, the story in itself. I mean, I'm 5'6". I remember meeting Alan Richardson, who's 6'4" and about as wide as he is tall. I was just looking up at him thinking, how on earth are you playing Anders Lassen with your American accent when he's a Dane? We had such a laugh. But the point about it is, when I went on set, I don't know how they managed to do it, but they had somehow managed to recreate the ethos and the spirit and the esprit de corps of a special forces unit like that at the time. There was the maverick, freewheeling, anything goes, no thought is inconceivable, think outside the box, do the unexpected. All of that stuff they'd kind of somehow distilled onto the film set, and you could see everybody was loving what they were doing. That, I think, and I hope, and I'm sure it comes through in the movie. You can sense that spirit, in what comes through on the film.
I definitely did. And I also thought that what I really enjoyed the very end of it. I loved seeing the real life pictures and the little blurbs about the people. And it was fascinating to me, though, seeing those people. I'll be honest with you, it was almost, part of me was kind of wishing they showed that at the very beginning, because it gave it a whole different vibe to me, like how close they did it. So yeah, kudos to all of them for bringing it to life. Hey,
Yeah, just one point on that, because you've hit the nail on the head. When we had a screening in London in front of a sample audience, about 200 people. This is just a cross section of the public, the viewing public. And the fascinating thing was, at the end there was a Q&A, and just about everybody said, "Oh my God, I couldn't believe it was a true story." When I saw those pictures at the end of the real people and their bios, it absolutely blew me away. Why don't we know about this story? So you've hit the nail on the head. The fact it is a true story based upon a true story really touches people.
yeah, it was just well done all around. Kudos to them. And I was really happy to have you on, though, too, because I think, to your point, more people will know, whoa, Guy Ritchie movie, let's check this out, as maybe they won't be as, available to see or read a Damien Lewis book, which I'm hoping today more people go, you know what, there's definitely more there that I would like to check out. To end this segment, one thing I would say to you, you've probably seen this movie, but I would say to you, if you're Netflix or whatever with your daughter, I would recommend The Dirty Dozen.
Yeah.
With Lee Marvin. I still, if I ever see it on, always watch it. Always watch it. And I think she would probably like that too.
It's a classic, yeah.
Well, Damien, I wanted to end with this. I think that generation from World War II, they all hold a special place to me. My grandfather served. So during that time, and we always hear them referred to as the greatest generation. So I thought, to end with, I want to ask you, based on the books, the research, in your opinion, what made them different?
Really simple answer. And it's never, obviously it's never, thank God it's never been recreated since the Second World War. It was the cause they had to fight for. Whenever you study these kind of units that were thrown together, bear in mind, the majority of those who served in a unit like the SS had no prior military experience. These were people from all walks of life, and that was the beauty of the unit. It was an egalitarian, unit based upon merit, not rank, and everybody was welcome, from lords and ladies through to, your plumber and your fencing contractor, and people with decidedly shady backgrounds who'd come out of the prisons. Even they were all welcome, because it took all kinds of mindsets with all different ideas to conjure up a new way to wage war differently in an unexpected way that the enemy would never conceive of. And because of that, when you study what made them take these insane suicidal risks time and time again behind enemy lines, one of the key factors is, apart from their esprit de corps and their brotherhood, is the fact they had a unifying cause to fight for. They knew they were fighting for the survival of the civilized world. And when you're faced with that, you do undertake the most inconceivable missions. You have to. You are forged together as one in this common cause. And I often get my books read by in manuscript form by a lady called Ross Townsend, who was an expert on post-traumatic stress disorder, something I'm very interested in. A lot of these guys in World War II came back with PTSD, wasn't diagnosed at the time. It was seen as being shameful, and they drowned themselves in drink, and some of them were very troubled. And she, she said to me about these kind of operations, you could only hold that team of individuals together over 5 years of waging war behind many lines, facing the repeated trauma that they did, because you had an overarching cause to fight for, which forged you as one. That was what was so essentially different about that time. And it forged that greatest generation in that furnace of the Second World War. Does that mean that we could never have the greatest generation step forward again? I don't think so. I mean, I obviously I work closely with modern day elite forces veterans. They had the same steel, the same determination, and heaven forbid, should those circumstances ever arise again, when we had a world conflict to fight for our, in defense of our freedoms, I have every confidence we'd have the right people step forward to do so. But let's hope and pray that never happens.
Yeah, I'm with you there, Damien. I hope and pray that it doesn't happen. I think on a lesser scale, I think we can all, at this, where we are with this world currently, I think we all can learn a lesson from those brave men and women. And that's the goal of, this podcast, to bring stories and to history, and hope that people get encouraged by some of the bravery of those men, those women, and also from someone like yourself, who has done amazing things and is really continues to put some excellent content out there. So Damien, I can't thank you enough for joining me here today. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to be on your show.
Yeah. Lastly, where can people find you at, Damien? I'll be sure to have show notes, but anything that you want them to take a look for specifically?
Yeah. So my website is just my name, www.damienlewis.com. On Twitter, I'm at author D Lewis, and on Facebook, I'm at Damien Lewis Writer. So just my name, and then those tags will get you there. And I post regularly about the kind of stuff I'm working on.
Fantastic. Well, for all my friends here in the US, Damien and his books about the British military, trust me, you will enjoy it as much as I have, I think. And there's a lot to be learned. And history is fascinating, and excellent work by Damien. So thanks everybody for listening. Damien, thanks again. Take care, everyone. Bye.
This has been the Bear Essentials. Thanks for listening. And remember, never hibernate on your goals.